Hey everyone, Brian and Dimitri here. Quick public service announcement that Mythicist Milwaukee's most fun event is our annual Myth Information Conference, held on Saturday, September 30th. The conference is powerful and draws national attendance, so this is definitely the event to attend.
This is really a great opportunity to meet like-minded people that want reasoned discussion and debate, and not a political knife fight, something I think is lacking in today's society.
This is our most ambitious effort, with speakers including intellectual rock stars Faisal Mutar, Asra Nomani, debating Islam in the age of Trump, moderated by another rock star, Matt Dillahunty.
In addition, we'll have secular activist Melissa Chen and YouTube juggernauts Armored Skeptic and Shoe Head leading a discussion panel, with another YouTube sensation, Sargon of Akkad, debating popular podcast host Thomas Smith from Serious Inquiries Only.
Not to mention all of the special guests who will be hanging out with everyone, including Seth Andrews, Richard Carrier, Paul Provenza, Allie Jackson, David Fitzgerald, Aaron Ra, and Bryce Blankenagel.
The day-long event culminates with the red carpet premiere of Batman and Jesus, a provocative documentary and comedy juxtaposing the lore of Batman with the saga of Jesus. Get your tickets now at mythicistmilwaukee.com for in-person or for the live stream. We'll see you at the historic Pabst Theater on September 30th.
Yay!
Welcome, everyone, to Myth Informed with your host, Brian Edward and Dimitri K. It is August 15th of 2017. Today we have with us Carl, or Sargon of Akkad Benjamin. He's a popular independent vlogger with nearly 600,000 subscribers on YouTube. A skeptic of ideologies, both theological and political, his channel is dedicated to rational arguments backed by evidence. Sometimes a polemicist, and at other times soft-spoken, Sargon of Akkad has created a considerable amount of content regarding skeptical thought. Welcome, Sargon.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's actually nearly 700,000.
Ooh.
Just to be accurate.
We have to update our numbers.
I know. I wrote that, months ago, and I was happy with it, and I forgot to update it.
And before we go further, Brian, you need to explain to people what a polemicist is.
I think a polemicist is a debater that seeks to eviscerate the opponent. Is that
it's eviscerate arguments, eviscerate positions, political
positions, not the opponent, but the opponent's position.
But in a nice way, right, Sargon?
Sometimes.
Well, Christopher Hitchens often was described as giving polemics.
He did give many polemics, and I loved every one of them. I was a big fan.
But speaking of followers, so maybe 700,000 on YouTube, but right now 0 on Twitter.
Yes, 0 on Twitter at the moment. But to be honest with you, I'm actually finding myself far more productive than I am when I have Twitter. I've got so much work done in the past couple of days. I'm actually quite enjoying my break from Twitter. It's actually been really productive.
So you feel like it's temporary because you were banned in January of this year.
I don't know.
For 2 days, right? And then your access was restored. So presumably, someone didn't like something. And now they're back at it again, right?
Yeah, the problem is that you're never given any real feedback. And I just literally do not know why I'm suspended. I've appealed the suspension. We'll see. But to be honest with you, I'm really not missing Twitter. Mm-hmm. Really rather enjoying not having it.
Well, when researching this, some of the things that come up, were some of the articles from January, and I'm like, this isn't the right one. But there's more than one Sargon of Akkad when you can change zeros to O's and so on and so forth. How many Twitter accounts claiming to be you are there?
Oh, there are loads. Loads of ideological enemies, I suppose you could call them. Because I mean, really, I don't like the label skeptic. I'm not really much for that label because it's not. It's not putting forward a worldview, and I am putting forward a worldview. I'm very much I use the term classical liberal just to be able to differentiate myself from socialists in people's minds, because if I say what I really am in reality is a social liberal,
right?
But I'm still a liberal rather than a socialist, which is, as soon as you say social liberal, that puts people in mind of socialism, especially when you say, well, social programs are acceptable, but the socialism itself isn't. These tend to be confusing terms, and so if I use the term classical liberal, it makes people understand that I'm coming from the sort of British American Enlightenment tradition. I'm pro free markets, I'm pro liberty, I'm pro the state enforcing these rights and these liberties.
Yeah, but didn't Bernie Sanders popularize social liberal in the last 24 months, basically? So that probably gives you an out right there. You can now call yourself a social liberal.
Yeah, I don't like using. I don't really like the terms used in America. You use very strange terms that don't really make a lot of sense a lot of the time, and you adapt them to mean what you want rather than what they actually mean. Not you personally, obviously, but the political climate in America. So I'm happy defining my own terms. I think
fair enough.
I'm happy to use classical liberal because it puts people in the right frame of mind. I mean, that puts them in sort of anti-theological frame of mind. So I'm not a Christian conservative, for example.
On the Twitter topic, Brian just mentioned that there's a lot of maybe copycats out there. There is a guy, Sargon of Akkad, and we thought it was you. And then there were a lot of very interesting right-wingy tweets that this guy was sending.
Yeah, there are lots of fake accounts of me that send lots of fake stuff, and Twitter for some reason refused to verify me. I have no idea why, but I mean, since I'm currently suspended for reasons unknown, I'm not all that surprised.
Yeah, my concern about you not being verified on Twitter and them not doing it was we were able to pick up some articles that put your tweets out, and we don't think it's actually your Twitter. So that's an issue. That's
where
very
I was
confusing to people.
Well, yeah, there's one that says, you know what? I looked into the whole holo hoax thing, and I've since been finding the deniers to actually be onto something here. And I was like,
that's not me.
Interesting.
I'm actually of the opinion that there's more than enough evidence of the Holocaust. I mean, there are people alive still who took part in it.
Yeah.
So I don't really understand the Holocaust denial. It's just like, look, there's loads of evidence.
Mm-hmm. I cannot imagine what would happen if I were misrepresented, like if someone were pretending to be me on social media, and I don't know what I would do. I mean, that's such an invasion of privacy. A lot of the time there isn't that much you can do, because if it's some guy behind 5 layers of VPN or something, and you're never going to find the guy to be able to serve him with any kind of court warrant or summons or something. So I don't know who they are. They're just people who hate me and feel like making things up because, eventually, hopefully someone that wants to speak to me will see it and then think, oh, Jesus, he's a Holocaust denier. I'm like, well, no, I'm actually not. But never mind.
No doubt it's probably a hardcore ideologue. And you don't know if it's from the hard left or the hard right, because I can't imagine that the Daily Stormer people, which is an actual real white ethno-nationalist website, like you at all, because you're definitely picking on them. You're picking on hardcore ideologic social justice warriors. They hate you. Like, how is it to get hate from both sides?
That article was pro. They were defending you. They were like, "Hey, this guy got banned. Why?" And so beyond them, and this was one of the questions that I really wanted to ask you. I mean, there are a lot of mainstream sources that kind of label you as an alt-righter. Gizmodo, Salon, Daily Dot, Vox, which I love Vox, and I was shocked that they classify you as an alt-righter.
Yeah, Vox are normally a bit more switched on than the rest, aren't they? But I think it's a deliberate political maneuver. What annoys me about this whole thing is it makes absolutely no sense to name anyone who isn't a white identitarian part of the alt-right. Because the alt-right is a white advocacy group, whereas basically they're the same sort of racial collectivists as the far left have become, where they're interested in Black Lives Matter. These people are basically White Lives Matter. And they were chanting that the Unite the Right demonstration that took place a couple of days ago. They chanting, you won't replace us and White Lives Matter. And it's like, okay, I mean, if the far left can't see how they've created this monster, then they're just completely irresponsible with identity politics. It's racial collectivism, and it goes against the fundamental values of individualism that I actually hold as a liberal. I would no more be part of the alt-right than I would be an SJW. And so it does annoy me when I get called alt-right.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
But it's interesting. So you haven't reached out to say, Vox or Gizmodo or any one of these and say, hey, I want to give an interview, set the record straight. You're mischaracterizing me, and I don't appreciate it.
No, I think these people are deliberately mischaracterizing me. I think they know exactly what they're doing. I've spoken to, there was a couple from, I have tried that. Okay. With, I think it was Gizmodo. There was a chap there and somewhere else, where I was literally just tweeting them, hey, look, I'm not alt-right. I can tell you what I am, but are you willing to update your article? And they were just literally like, no.
Wow.
So it's like, okay, well, this is a deliberate political smear then. I mean, anyone who watches any of my content or spends 5 minutes just talking to me can work out the fact that I'm not a white identitarian. I mean, I'm not even like a white person. You know, I get called a quadroon by the alt-right because I'm not pure white race.
Wait, what the hell is a quadroon?
The idea that I'd be a white
One-fourth
identitarian is a bit
some other
ridiculous. But never mind.
A quadroon is what, 1/4 some other race, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're not white enough. Wow.
No,
and
I'm not white enough.
I think that's a fair definition of the alt-right, that you have to be a hardcore white identitarian. You believe that in some way, I've read some of these websites, they're weird, you know, that Western civilization or the Enlightenment couldn't have come from, say, the Chinese or in Africa or something, that it had to come from white people. Now that's racist. You know, and this civilization's for everyone, and it could have come out of anywhere.
Yeah, well, it couldn't have come out of just anywhere. I think that the thing that brings it about is security. You have to have a certain amount of security of person to be an individualist. If you're in dire danger, you can't put the importance or the rights of an individual above the rights of the group.
That's a good point.
Because the group's in danger. And I mean, it literally, you know, life or death danger. And that's actually the rationale that most of the alt-right have for being white identitarians. I think if they didn't think the white race was in danger, they probably wouldn't be white identitarians. They probably wouldn't care. And I really think that, I mean, like, so many of them actually really care that they've had all of this, what they call, and I can agree with them on this, anti-white propaganda. I mean, there is a lot of it. Brett Weinstein was, you know, the perfect example of it. You're white, you must leave the university campus.
Right.
I mean, I can't imagine describing that as anything other than anti-white.
Right.
And I can't imagine that they think they can do this for long enough and not get a coordinated identitarian response saying, no, we're pro-white. You know, it just seems inevitable to me. So, like, don't start with the anti-white stuff.
Oh, it's polarization.
Pro-white stuff.
That's absolutely.
The same reverse is true. You know, if everything was anti-black stuff, well, we had civil rights movements. You know, and if I'd lived 50 years ago, I'd be part of that. You know, but at the moment, I'm so against all of this identitarian stuff. It's just really, it's anti-Western. That's the thing. It's really collectivist. It's anti-individualistic and
anti-enlightenment. You know, and that one of my friends, Melissa Chen, who's going to be also speaking at the Myth Information Conference. Get your tickets now, September 30th, 2017. Maybe that's 6 weeks away if I'm doing it right. Doesn't even like to call it Western culture because she says it's for everyone. You know, she's originally from Singapore. So really, like, it's Enlightenment values that seem to be kind of under attack. And that is an issue. And I think that's exactly what she's going to be speaking about, why we need to defend
it. In a way, she's right. You know, it is for everyone. You know, it's a universalist philosophy. So, yeah, it does encompass everyone. And there's no moral community of us versus them. You know, whereas with socialism, it's the socialist versus the fascists, and everyone's a fascist. If it's Black Lives Matter, it's, you know, black people versus white people. If it's all of these collectivist ideologies have to have an other that they rescind the sort of moral consideration from, which is why you ended up with it's okay to punch a Nazi if they're just existing. It's like, no, it's not. It's, you know, what they believe is actually immaterial. What they do is what's important. And if they're like Richard Spencer, if they're just standing around doing nothing, then no, you don't have license to punch them just because they believe something. And the thing is, the philosophies are really similar in that way, because the difference between like Richard Spencer and, I don't know, Black Lives Matter, or the founders of Black Lives Matter, is just who they consider to be morally important. You know, Richard Spencer obviously doesn't consider non-white people to be morally important. That's not to say that he'd just kill them or something like that. He's, you know, like, I mean, we don't consider animals to be morally important, which is why we eat them. You know, but that doesn't mean we're just going to kill animals just for the fun of it or something like that. And, you know, and I'm not saying that Richard Spencer sees black people as animals either. I know people are going to say that, but it's about like levels of importance, and Richard Spencer only ascribes the highest level of importance to white people. That's his in-group, that's his collective. They're the things that he's concerned with. That's who gets his moral franchise, and other people get reduced tiers of it. And I don't want any of that. I want everyone to have exactly the same moral consideration, regardless of their beliefs.
And that makes
unfortunately, that means that if Richard Spencer's standing around doing nothing, he doesn't get to get punched.
Of course.
In the same way that, you know, no one else gets to get punched either, no matter how communist they are, you know, and whatever it is, you know, no one deserves to just get punched if they're not committing an act that means they need restraining.
Right. It seems like it becomes weird because I know Richard Spencer, the white nationalist, believes, and I've heard him say this, that America needs to stay a majority white nation, which is a silly concept. Really, I can see preserving culture, that we want to preserve American culture, but it doesn't matter what your skin color is. But then when Joe Biden, our former vice president, comes out and says, eventually America will not be a majority white nation, and that's a good thing. That should be a neutral thing, don't you think?
Yeah.
Why is that a good thing? That's
Absolutely.
odd, and you can see why that might rile people up.
Oh, I can completely see where the alt-right are coming from, because it's statements like that do make it look like there is a coordinated effort to displace white people in the United States. I mean, like Cenk Uygur and Ann Coulter had a debate, and I think it was about 45 minutes into the debate, he was reading her tweet about how she was saying it had become a minority white country, and the crowd cheered. Cenk supporters in the crowd cheered, and I'm just like, I mean, how can you not say that's not an organized, like an active effort by a certain group of people to actually do this? I mean, I personally would not care about this, but I'm not pro or against it. I'm just, things change over time, and as long as this isn't destroying the country, as long as people still hold the same values, the sort of Western Enlightenment values, which can be universal if you ascribe to that political philosophy. I mean, like, it's no problem getting Buddhists in, right? And people who come from Buddhist countries, even if they're not practicing Buddhists, because Buddhism is also a universalist faith. It doesn't have an in-group and an out-group. And so it is compatible with Christianity in that way. It doesn't look for someone to call the enemy and place blame on.
Not all Buddhists, because they're killing
it's
Muslims.
Very collectivist and very domineering. And so I can completely see why there's a conflict there. The moral franchise just isn't expanded to the kuffar like it is to the ummah. And it's a real problem within Islam. And especially as it comes packaged with a complete political philosophy on how to run your entire life, then suddenly, you can see why it's a problem.
Right. Well, there's a certain amount of uptake, right? There are, I think in Malaysia, there's beheadings going on left and right. There's a big Buddhist versus
Burma and Sri Lanka. Yeah. There's a lot of Buddhist violence toward Muslims, and no one talks about that because
Myanmar, right?
Yeah, Myanmar, because they're not considered an antagonistic religion in the West. But I do understand how in this country people want to push things faster toward multiculturalism, and there's some stat out there that whatever it is by 2050 will be predominantly beige, essentially. So there won't be a white. There'll be like an off-white majority that's in the world, and that's there's nothing wrong with that. But there's a small group of people that actively want to push against it, and that's true for anything. There are language purists that never want English to change. There are people that don't like change in sports, and they want to keep rules that we've had since whatever it is, the dawn of time. That's totally understandable as long as that group remains small. And this far leftist movement is pushing more people into this right camp. It
seems like are we suffering from a moral panic? Because that everybody seems to be, when you say my group is in danger, right? The alt-right, but that's exactly what I'm hearing on the college protests and the campuses and the blocking of free speech. Like, you are denying our right to exist, when no one has ever said that. But that sounds that I'm in danger. Like, is this a moral panic? Is my question.
I mean, yes, it is. Like, it's. I mean, they consider it immoral to genocide white people, and they believe there is a white genocide going on. It's actually not. The population of the countries is growing, in some of them. But it's really white people deciding that they're too rich to have lots of kids. And so it's below replacement rate at the moment. No, it really is what it is.
Yeah. No,
but the problem I have, right, I hate the terminology we're using because it's inherently misleading. I mean, like, you said multiculturalism earlier, but what you mean is multiracialism, isn't it?
Correct.
Yeah.
You don't want to have an Islamic colony in your country, do you?
True.
But you don't care if Muslims come over because you can get like Majid Nawaz, completely liberal Muslims who don't want like Islamism. I could accept that. And same with Catholicism. I don't want some Christian theocracy either. I'm not accepting multiple cultures to rule over parts of the countries or anything. But I mean, I'm absolutely not bothered about the race of the people who come in, as long as they come from a similar political philosophy, because I think that really does determine their actions within the country and basically for the long-term good of the country. But everyone calls it multiculturalism, and that in itself is validating the alt-right, because they say, well, Enlightenment culture, this comes from white people. It's like, okay, well, we apparently agree, because we think non-Enlightenment culture comes from brown people and that they can't participate, apparently. That's why we call it multiculturalism, I guess. Yeah, it really is annoying.
So if that's the case, I have a question here, because I've had this very recently, within the past 48 hours, had this argument. We talk about the refugee crisis, how they're pouring into Europe, and potentially the U.S. taking refugees, and I liken it to the Irish and the Italians coming to America, the Russian Jews coming to America in the late 80s, early 90s, and then there was a movement even in the 70s. So there were people that came here. We took them as refugees. People hated the Irish when they came here. People hated the Italians when they came here. I'm pretty sure they hated the Russians too. And so now there's a subset of people who hate the Muslims that come here, and or I should say the Arabs. And the argument that's made is that all of those groups of people, they had Western values, they came here, they wanted to assimilate. You have Arabs coming here that continue, wearing hijabs, and then they are not integrating into society, and thus they are a different type of migration, so it is actively right to resist that immigration. What do you guys think about that?
You'll have to give me another minute. Sorry, man.
No, do your thing.
What do I think about that? Well, I mean, it's not totally Arab. I mean, you can be from Somalia and be Muslim. So I wouldn't say Arab. I would say fundamentalist Islamic, right?
But Somalia is not sending refugees. It's mostly
they are. There's a huge refugee. Al-Shabaab is the terrorist group in Somalia. They're ravaging the place. There are plenty of refugees, and they're mostly in Minneapolis, right?
Yeah,
I've met
Minnesota.
I'm sure a lot of these folks are totally fine. But the thing is, when you have a community that hangs around with itself and holds a ton of different values, you've got an issue. I mean, even like look at the refugees, or not refugees, but immigration coming from Mexico. Right now, they're somewhere in the middle, right? Their culture is very similar to ours, different flavor, but when a bunch of people speak Spanish and they congregate together, it does seem weird, right? But their culture is a lot closer. We share religion that's a bit different, but so it's a lot easier to say, okay, well they more easily blend in, but Islam doesn't as much
because of purely visual differences.
No, I think it's things that happen in school. So I don't even think it's the terrorist bombings that go on as much, but when your little girl comes home from first grade and she wore shorts or a skirt or whatever. And, she said that she was called a slut, who doesn't even know what that means, by somebody else that, doesn't like what she's wearing because, some 6-year-old boy that was told, you can't wear this. It's
I have no idea. Culture. You just went off a tangent.
Okay. The dress codes.
Okay.
Right. They're, if you're in a fundamentalist sect of Islam, your dress codes would say that you're not allowed to show anything. Like many of the little girls wear veils.
Okay,
right?
so
and then you see your little girl, who's a little girl, she's not sexual, called a slut by some 6-year-old boy. Where did he get that? He got it from his parents. So you have a cultural beef with these people.
I think that's somewhat of a side argument. My theory on this is that when folks come here, they feel they're an immigrant, they're in a totally new society. They're not comfortable with it because everything is new. They gravitate toward what is comfortable and safe to them, and that is their own insular communities. And to remain in an insular community, you have to wear all this shit. You have to wear a hijab, whatever it is that they do. or else they're going to get ostracized. So they do that. So at least the generation that immigrated has to do that. Now their kids are in a slightly different...
They're in a better position.
They're in a better position. And so we would hope that the next generation does assimilate. But unless you can't
that's the problem with multiculturalism. Multiculturalism, there's no pressure, even on the second or third generation, to integrate. They can stay insular. And that's the problem. It is some pressure that you ought to integrate, that integration is good.
Because you chose to come here.
Well, and we're going to get the diversity that you're going to blend in, right?
But I think that Stephen Miller had a salient point to this, that America has expanded and contracted the amount of immigration it takes in over periods of time, and I do wonder if that's given the new migrants time to essentially acclimatize and integrate into American culture, because American culture is different to most other nations' culture. It's not based on an ethnic group. It's based on a philosophy. It's based on a set of ideas.
Yeah.
And people come there, and you have that as a guiding impetus in your culture. You know, the American dream. You can come here and you can be successful. This is a land of opportunity. Europe doesn't have that. You know, Europe is the opposite of a land of opportunity. It's a land stilted in ancient castles and aristocracy and, privilege and hierarchy and things like that. It's a completely different mindset. And I don't know what that's done to the Europeans that makes them different, but I mean, it just means that we don't have the sort of ethos the United States has. And
in a better or worse way,
I guess, is rescinding.
Because you mentioned that it's different, but I don't know if it's better or worse.
It depends what you want, doesn't it? But I mean, there's no point placing a moral judgment on it. But I mean, it's just whether it's good for immigration or not. The United States handles immigration well. I mean, like, Muslims in the United States are way more liberal than the Muslims in Britain.
Absolutely
true.
That's absolutely true. And they actually are more successful. They make more money on average than the average American. So you can't even say that they're financially dispossessed as a whole, because the average Muslim American makes more than the average American. Well, I don't think that's true in Britain and France.
So I like the pivot that you just made, because we don't often get to... Well, we just did talk to a Brit at our last podcast, Matt Kirshen, but we didn't talk about the refugee kind of situation very heavily. And we know that you were, at least in the beginning stages, pro-Brexit. And I don't know if
I'm still pro-Brexit.
Okay, I was going to say I didn't want to mischaracterize if your position shifted.
No, very very much so. Yeah, even if they mess it up and it all goes horribly wrong, it's still better than the alternative. Because I mean, no one can ever give me an impression of what a good future in Europe is going to look like, because there's just no good example. It's just a big weight dragging Europe down.
Perfect. That's the kind of the clarification that I wanted, because personally, when all of this was going down before the vote, I was kind of in the Brexit camp, but I didn't know enough about it, so I didn't really publicize my views. But because you're there and you're on the ground and you have a much clearer perspective, and you know some of the politicians that are involved. I'm not a huge fan of Nigel Farage, but I know he was heavily pushing this. What do you see in Europe that's happening where you said, absolutely, I'm 100% in favor of Brexit?
Top-down centralization. That's it's, and it really, and again, it comes down to the basic philosophies involved, because liberalism is bottom-up decentralization, and that's very much the mindset of the English. And anything that isn't bottom-down, decentralized, building on top of the base,
top-down,
is something that the English just object to. They just don't like it. And I don't even think they know why they don't like it, but they just see something they're going to, too much power and control being centralized. I mean, like, with the EU as well, it's a step removed from the actual voter base too, which is even worse, because it's hard enough to get our own politicians to do what we want, and we vote directly for them. The idea of getting the EU Commission to do what we want, when we don't even vote for them, we vote for the people who vote for them, is ridiculous, in my opinion.
That's what our system is supposed to be, right? But our electors pretty much are pledged. We were supposed to elect electors; they elect the president, but that's not how it works in practice.
Yeah, exactly. You can't say that these people are representative. That any of the commission members are representative of any of the countries that they're going to be making decisions for. Because I mean, the politician and it's the head of state that elect the commission, as far as I'm aware, and I mean, these people rarely get in on that much of a majority. So by the time it filters through, it's going to be a very small minority of people who not only voted for that leader, but would also vote for the commissioner, who they end up electing. And it's like, well, I don't consider this to be a representative democratic system.
So I completely agree with that assessment, and rightfully so. But as my job, I will be devil's advocate in this case. What do you say to the fact that the general thought is that Western society, all of Europe, for example, has the same cultural mindset? So if you want to avoid something like World War I, World War II, another major war, and you're kind of culturally, you coalesce around one ruling body, that is going to help prevent conflict in the future, which is why we should support the EU.
It's not all one culturally homogenous political entity. And I mean politically homogenous entity. The continent is far more collectivist than the Anglosphere. The English-speaking nations are very, very much more individualist. The continent is very, very collectivist, and always has been. And I don't even know if it's not even their fault, right? But to us, to sort of British people, they look tyrannical because the Germans have got this. They're very institutionalist. They trust their institutions, whereas in Britain we don't have trust in our institutions or our politicians. But Merkel is still regarded as a competent politician, even though she's effectively Germany's Hillary Clinton.
Exactly.
And it's quite amazing, really. But for some reason they're very much, they believe in their institutions, and they're accepting of top-down total systemic control, whereas in Britain we're just not. We don't like top-down systemic control by anybody, and it's the sort of thing that has to be justified very greatly at each step for us. And even then, it's the sort of thing that people will just hate on principle, mock on principle. Like any politician, I would never go into politics in the country just because of how disrespected politicians are as a class. Nobody likes them. And so Jeremy Corbyn's cult makes it even weirder. Theresa May doesn't have anything of the sort on the other side because no one likes her. But we understand that she might do a good job. It turns out that we're wrong. She's not going to do a good job. But it's a completely different way of approaching like civics that England and the continent have, and by extension English-speaking countries. And it makes people uncomfortable, and they don't even know why. It's really because we don't teach civics anymore.
Is there an alt-right version then in Britain or some of these other countries?
Sargon of Akkad.
Well, that's the thing. It's the Germans that are the alt-righters. Whether they're the Antifa or the Nazis.
Those are the Nazis.
They're still the collectivists.
The German Freedom Party
about
or
people's
something?
race.
But is it fair to say, though, that your argument for Brexit is not from a let's keep the immigrants out, let's keep the society homogenous and white? It's more from the decentralization of
So we have control of our elections and we have political autonomy as opposed to anti-immigration. Because many people say it's anti-immigration.
Well, that's true, but I'm also against immigration, but again, not on racial grounds. I mean, I'm against immigration from Poland, or from Mexico, from Iceland, from just mass immigration in general is really not very beneficial to the working class in a country. And disenfranchising the working class is a bad idea because they're the majority voters.
Yeah.
And if Donald Trump is the perfect example. You can get a populist demagogue, and it'll be necessary for the populist demagogue to exist if the working class are being disenfranchised. And one way of disenfranchising them is with open borders, because it actually is a form of class warfare. It does depress their wages. It does increase competition for jobs. It does make their social living conditions more difficult. I mean, anyone can look at the grooming gangs in Britain and tell me that mass immigration hasn't had victims. Because it absolutely has, and it is, but it's not the problem of the people in LA. It's not the problem of the people in I don't know, naming a fancy part of London or Cambridge or something like that. No, it's the problem for the poor people in the north, and the intelligentsia aren't there, and they don't care because it doesn't affect them.
So, what would you say to the people of, say, Germany or Japan that has a vastly aging population, not enough people paying into the the social, I didn't know what to call it. They don't have Social Security, but into the social pool, and so you essentially you don't have enough money to fund your social systems.
save up, I guess. You're the one who chose not to have children. You're the one who chose not to replace the population at a necessary replacement rate to ensure that you would end up with a pension. What can you've got to live with that result now. So either you're going to keep working until you die, or you better save up some money. You've made your bed, but no, what we're going to do actually is import millions of people from an incompatible culture and have them live with all the poor people, because fuck those poor people. It's unacceptable in my opinion. They can just deal with the fact that they don't get a pension.
Okay. No, I mean, I like it. It's real. I love
it is real. It's the truth.
I love the fact that
what you did.
Vice had a criticism for you, and they said your logic before all attitude, claiming that when you're speaking on issues of social nature that cannot be boiled down to textbook definitions of words, it's not really an approach that works particularly well. I would say that definition is exactly the answer that you just gave, and I loved it. No, it's perfect.
The problem with that's what they're saying there, right? That is a very nice little bit of rhetorical sleight of hand. Yes. Because when they say you can't boil everything down to textbook definitions, what they mean is if you use standard English definitions for the words we're using, then we're wrong. But if you accept our redefinition of these words, then we're right. And I'm sorry, I don't accept that, for example, racism requires power plus prejudice. As in racism, the principle, being prejudiced on the basis of race, requires material contextualization. They don't believe in the abstract concept of the principle of what racism is. And I do. And I can completely see why they wouldn't. I mean, this is a branch of neo-Marxism. It's a materialist philosophy. I'm not surprised they don't believe in this. But I'm sorry, I'm totally rejecting their redefinition of racism. It doesn't require a material contextualization. It can be done in principle, which is why one individual can be racist to another. Because if we accept their premise that racism is systemic, institutionalized discrimination based on race, okay, that means I, as an individual who's not part of an institution, can't be racist. Mm-hmm. I can say whatever I like, and I can't be racist because I'm not holding any institutional power. It's a stupid definition, and I completely reject it. If you want to describe institutional racism, which I agree can exist, I mean, that's what the slave trade was. I agree it can exist, but you call it institutional racism because it's not just the new definition of racism. Interpersonal racism still exists.
Yeah, it seems like, too, it's not just a redefinition of racism, but the definition shapeshifts. For example, in this, you brought up Brett Weinstein, who is the professor that's giving all this shit from Evergreen State College.
Is it
being
Greg
branded
Weinstein?
a racist. Brett. Sorry, did I put... Yeah, Brett. But he says that the bar of racism is set so low by this new definition that you're simply bound to trip over it. And when you do, and apologize and admit that you're influenced by racism, this low definition, then in the future, after you apologize, you're shamed and held guilty under the standard definition of racism as I've judged you solely by your color. Mm-hmm. I mean, yes. That's the problem. You can't. It's not even a redefinition. And I've even seen white supremacy now being used. We live in a culture of white supremacy. I mean, that's even bumping it up there.
I've done that before.
It's having their cake and eating it too. It's collectivizing the sort of problem and then individualizing the guilt. If it's no one person's problem, don't point to any white person and say, you're responsible, you have white privilege. This is your fault, because they can't stop doing it by your definitions. Everything you're doing is to put them in a position where there's no win. Mm-hmm. There is absolutely no winning, and effectively this is creating a new caste system. White people on the bottom, disabled trans black lesbians at the top. Okay, that is literally going to be the caste system. I mean, you can see how close to the bottom gay people have become. I mean, I've seen articles where they've said gay people aren't oppressed. And it's like, okay, but that's a marginalized identity that you have in your intersectional stack, and it's like, okay, well, that's close to being a straight white man then. Probably, it's not too close. They have levels for this. It's so bizarre. But I'm sorry. And again, as a liberal, the whole point of liberalism is to eradicate sort of a new any kind of aristocratic class. System. And if you've got universal rights, which we all share the same rights. I mean, not once could you ever ask a feminist to point them to a set of rights that men have that women don't. They'll give you an example of a duty or responsibility like the draft, but I'm sorry, the rights to be drafted is a pretty shoddy right that I'd give up. It's not a right, it's a duty, and you have the same rights without the same duties. And frankly, that means you have privileges. And who in a society has privileges? That's right, the ruling class, which is why you have these diversity officers. I mean, Google has been taken over by diversity at this point, right? If at any point, I mean, this Google memo, I find that the reaction to this the most baffling thing in the world. And if they weren't, like, I don't know, like, ideologically in control of Google, none of this would happen. I mean, there'd be no reason for this guy to feel the need to write a manifesto. You know, he's done this, and apparently there's like 50% support from a poll from Google insiders. Lots of people agree with the things he was saying.
Well, and we have to give people some background just in case they haven't read the memo.
Oh,
yeah, and do you want?
Yeah,
go ahead.
so an employee named James Damore, if I'm getting that right, he went to a diversity training. So he's a tech employee at Google. He's upset with some of the things that he's heard, and he writes about a 20-page memo. It's extraordinarily well sourced with links, and to my opinion, very moderated and makes some arguments that basically saying there are some biological differences. This could account for certain things, that we don't have enough women in tech, but we're going about this the wrong way. And guess what? We shouldn't necessarily go for a 50-50 parity because men and women might be interested in different things. And he's been held up. I mean, you specifically mentioned the diversity officer at Google, Danielle Brown, who said his views are, quote, he advanced incorrect assumptions about gender, but didn't address any of the evidence that he had done in there. And I read 4 different professors. Virgin Culet had an article about this, and 3 out of the 4 said we'd have given the paper an A-, and there's not too much that's objectionable here.
Yeah.
Like, wow.
I mean, the evolutionary psychologists are speaking in unison on this. They're all saying, yes, he is correct. Behavioral traits do vary between men and women to certain degrees because men and women are biologically different and they've evolved to fulfill different roles. And, you know, it doesn't have to be deterministic, but if you leave people to their own devices in, say, a free society, you will not see an equal outcome between men and women, and nor should you expect it.
Right. When you have more freedom, you have more freedom to choose to pursue your interests.
You're just going to choose something you prefer. You're going to follow your natural inclinations. And if your natural inclinations are on average for men to go into tech work and for women to go into people work, and they are, then you're going to see a kind of disparity and with a small amount of crossover, which is what we see. And so it's like, right, okay, there's nothing to be alarmed about here. There's no reason to panic.
If I'm in a poor country,
what happened with Google? You know, I mean, like Sundar Pichai, he as soon as this memo was released to the press,
that's the CEO of Google.
Yeah, the CEO of Google cancelled his holiday in Africa, went back to Google HQ and was going to arrange, a big meeting where all 60,000 Google employees would be live streamed. Like, I don't know, him telling them that the memo was nonsense, not to read it, and then it was Sundar Pichai himself who made the decision to fire Damore. And so it's like, right, okay, let's assume that you're working at a company that isn't being controlled by what I can only really accurately describe as a racialist, collectivist ideology.
Yep.
And see what happens when you publish his memo. Nothing happens. He goes, well, I think there might be biological differences. And you could just turn around and say, well, okay, we disagree with you. Go back to your desk. They have created this firestorm around the opinion of an engineer. You know, it might be an informed opinion, and that's fine. That's even better. You know, the informed opinion of an engineer. Okay, you go, okay, well, yeah, okay, that's fine. A normal company would just put that aside and just go, well, we don't care. You know, either we don't care about your opinion on this, or we agree, or we disagree, and it just doesn't matter. But instead, Google went nuts. They had to fire the wrong thinker. They had to expel him from the inside, and it's so bizarre. And then you've got all these other people coming out anonymously to various sources like Wired and Breitbart to report their story. Yeah, it's really, really intense in here. The atmosphere is crazy. And then you've got the management clamping down on dissidents, and it's like, okay, there's something wrong with Google, and it's something to do with diversity.
And did you know?
Then you had Susan Wojcicki. She put out a statement in Fortune magazine, where she was literally just saying to her daughter. Apparently, she'd couched it in the woke 8-year-old meme, where her daughter had come up to her and said, "Oh, mummy, is it true that there are biological differences between men and women that account for the different numbers of people in different professions?" You know, and she goes through this huge screed and goes, "I told her no, it's not true." Okay, well, you're a science denier, Susan. You've just denied an entire field of science. You are a flat earther when it comes to gender, Susan.
Oh
Yeah.
my God.
No, that's a good point. I mean, the Google CEO, quoted, he says, to suggest that the group of our colleagues have traits that make them less biologically suited to work is offensive and not okay. Which is
and not representative of what he said.
An egregious straw man. That's exactly what I'm going to say.
Exactly. Utterly egregious, because he wasn't saying that women shouldn't do the work or anything the same. He was saying there's no need to have an inquisition into why we don't have 50% women.
Exactly.
That they prefer. He said that they could do the work, but they may prefer another field. Mm-hmm. That's something
Google
a free society offers.
If anything, what he was really doing is criticizing Google's methods, not the desire to get 50% women in there. He was saying, look, the way that the company is operating at the moment is dissuading women from joining just by women looking at it and going, well, that's not the sort of thing I want to do, and just choosing otherwise, just a market force. And you could attract more women if you made certain things more cooperative and more focused towards these personality traits. Yeah. And they took that like it was an assault on women. It's like, no, that is literally a utilitarian way of getting more women into Google.
Jonathan
Haidt changed some of these roles
from New York University School of Business. I mean, Jonathan Haidt, the social scientist, has mentioned that diversity training, that there's no good evidence that it helps, but there is evidence that when applied poorly, especially in a way that seems like anti-majority, either anti-man, anti-white, or whatever, that can actually hurt company performance. So the fact that there's no evidence for it, so yeah, these claims are real. Like diversity training, we should focus on making it productive. It's working, because at the best it seems to be neutral.
Mm-hmm. Honestly, right? I think the laws are good enough. I think if you just have laws against discrimination based on gender and race and sexuality, or any of these protected characteristics, which I agree should be protected. I don't think companies should be discriminating based on race or gender, unless it's a male-female thing, obviously. But you know what I mean. Just if it's a random job, there's no real reason to do it. Why do it? I mean, the BBC in Britain actually has job positions available only to non-white people. Oh. And I mean, you could probably understand it if it was, say, in front of a camera, but these aren't. These are just like background researchers. And it's like, what is the reason to discriminate on the basis of race for a researcher in the background? There's no good justification for that.
That's discrimination right there. Racial discrimination.
Exactly.
I mean, in fact, the New York Times article came out that David Brooks wrote, these mobs, and they're both on the right and the left, I guess in this case on the left, that rise up and demand scapegoats. In this case, his firing, and he's hammered by the CEO himself. He's actually calling for the CEO to resign, meaning we need leaders and CEOs who will stand up to the mobs. That's what the mark of a real leader is. Correct. And I do think that's true, because where we have mobs, alt-right mobs, demanding something or other, you can have these left mobs. Yeah, we do need leaders that can stand up and say no, or else we're going to have literally a Google for the people that are, quote, on the right and one on the left. I mean, this is silly.
It's very interesting how, and this isn't the only company to do it. Something has happened at the BBC recently. It's very similar with the BBC pay gap scandal, where basically the diversity quotas and numbers have come out, and they're woefully inadequate. They're terrible, in fact. And I mean, there are now groups of women suing the BBC, as there is a group of women preparing to sue Google over their failed diversity policies. And it's like, okay, shouldn't that come with a penalty to whoever's running the diversity department? Should there be no accountability here? Because, I mean, it's not just one person running the diversity department. It's an entire sort of priesthood of people throughout the company who are overseeing diversity, and they've failed. So the people doing this are not very good at their jobs, because I mean, surely, you would expect them to end up not getting sued at the end of the process.
Yeah, but was the study
be some accountability
adequate?
Here, should there not?
Was the wage study accurate, or was it misconstrued? Because what you can do is you can show
entirely misconstrued,
but
they can't say it. Yeah. If they say it, then they admit that their ideology is hokum.
Of course, because you can go through all of the jobs that every woman holds and all of the jobs that all of the men hold, and you can say, oh, well, there's a huge gap. But then you find out that, I don't know, more women want to be in HR, and that's a lower paying job. And so if you compare that to whatever it is.
They work less hours, they take more time off.
Correct.
For things like pregnancy and whatnot. It's women just prioritize lifestyle over work, and men prioritize work over lifestyle, because men are more motivated to make money and women are more motivated to be secure. It's like, okay, well, what do you want to do? What are you going to do? I mean, the option is to either make men work less or make women work more.
I'm in favor of making men work less. I'm raising my hand for that.
The thing is, if
Dimitri's always wanted a sugar mama.
Working, that's their choice, isn't it? I don't want to stop them working if they want to work. I mean, this whole the whole worry about, oh my God, there's a disparity between men and women. It's like, okay, so what?
Mm-hmm.
Are you saying that women are impoverished? They're clearly not. Are you saying that they can't get jobs? That's clearly not true. 30%, of these employees are women. There are lots of women there. There's just not a parity of women, and that's for good reasons that we have laid out that eventually go back to primitive biological reasons, but it's not necessarily deterministic, which is why we have some women. Mm-hmm. I mean, if anything, this looks like a liberal system working as planned.
Correct.
And a bunch of weird racial collectivists have come in and started acting like witch hunters.
That's exactly
what's bizarre.
Happened. I think the question is how much. So the gender, the wage gap myth. Whoever wants to hate me for that.
The thing is, it's not a myth. There is a gap, and it's not a wage gap. It's like an earnings gap,
right? And it's how much
there
is that?
is, but it should be.
Is it what it said, like 70 cents to the dollar, and is that based on funky math, or is it really I'm doing the same job as someone else and she's getting
paid on
less?
Completely primitive math. It's just adding up all of the men, adding up all of the women, and then comparing the totals. I mean, obviously, if you do that, you could do that with, say, left-handed and right-handed people, and you're probably going to get the same sort of disparity. I mean, more men work than women. There are more women as stay-at-home partners than there are men. And so, okay, yeah, if you take 10, 15 or whatever percentage it is out of the workforce, and then you add up the two workforces, yeah, sure, women are going to have to be earning a lot of money to catch up with the men because men, there are just more of them. Working for longer hours. It's not on a case-by-case basis. And if it was, on a case basis, you'd have a lawsuit to settle with them. You'd be owed a lot of money. And that actually happened. I think it was Birmingham City Council in Britain a few years ago. A group of women realized that they were actually doing that, and they sued them. And good, they should sue them.
Yeah, and it seems like, too, if you add the traditional couple, the man working, the wife raising the kids, I've seen a lot of top earners thank their wives, saying, without my wife helping me, I simply could not have done this. That alone, right? I mean, these men, if they didn't have that wife, wouldn't be making as much.
But that's the witch hunt stuff that that Sargon's talking about. I more so, what's the counter argument to there is no earnings transparency? I can't go to Google and be like, hey, what does your entry-level, female engineer make? What does that person make? What does that person make? There is no transparency. So one could, from the shadows, argue that there is a wage gap. You can't prove it one way. You can't prove it the other way. So
I think it's relatively obvious, actually. I think if Google were to release a case-by-case basis the wages of, I don't know, whatever various levels of engineers and, by the names, I bet that you wouldn't find any disparities at all. Or the disparities you'd find would be like, paid $200 extra a month for a promotion.
But that's
for an achievement of a piece of work.
That's a guess. And what the feminist position is, there's this, there's all these companies out there, and we think that there is a gap. But we can't prove it, neither can you, so therefore we must err on the side of caution, and there is a wage gap.
Yeah, but I mean, the argument is we're socialized the wrong way. If only we would teach kids
the God
early.
Of the gaps argument. Mm-hmm. Every time the wage gap argument comes up, a new refinement of it comes out, and the actual proportion of the unaccounted for difference.
Smaller and smaller.
Smaller and smaller. Literally, it's something like 4%. And it's not that that's sexism. It's just that we don't know what that is. It could be, the assertiveness of men versus women and things like this. So it's something that's very difficult to account for. But there is a gap. I mean, a small portion of that will be sexism. I'm sure.
Yeah.
But it's we are getting into such minute numbers that it's just so hard to identify in daily life. And so it's like, right, okay, is it having an effect on women? No. In fact, young women are starting to out-earn young men because they're the ones going to university more, and they're the ones getting degrees. Therefore, they're the ones getting jobs. Therefore, we don't even need to do anything.
Among millennials,
that needs to be done here.
Reverse wage gap. Yeah, exactly, and that's fine. if those women are out achieving them.
That's fine. I don't care, you know.
But speaking of, I don't want to mischaracterize feminists in some way, because feminist is like a label, like alt-right get thrown around. What does feminist even mean? You could have the hardcore, you can have Christina Hoff Sommers, very
there
different.
Are a few definitions. I can reel a few off for you, but
I was going to ask about Lacey Green, like specifically. I mean, talk about an argument with a feminist that you got into that ended in some sort of reconciliation. Can you tell us about that? Are you and Lacey Green friends now? What was said? How did that come about?
Yeah, I mean, we're certainly on speaking terms. She seems like a nice person. I think that we had a nice chat, and I think she thinks I'm a nice person, which I try to be. I think the problem is that, I mean, people like Lacey Green and Lee Sarkeesian, being outspoken internet feminists, have always, throughout their entire careers, received harassment and, you know, abuse on the internet via Twitter, you know, or emails, something like that. There's just it's the nature of being a bigot in public, to be honest. If you are going to have a philosophy that leaves out a certain segment of the population and then blames them for the problems that your group are having, then yeah, you're going to get blowback from that population. There's that group. There's just no. I mean, you'd have to be ridiculous to think that they weren't going to tell you that they didn't like you because they thought you were a bigot. And so these people have always received nasty messages. And I can imagine that from the perspective of someone who's receiving nasty messages, it can look like anyone else who's criticizing you publicly is trying to stir that up. I'm sure that from that perspective, it does look that way. From my perspective, being critical of these people and their ideas, it's entirely counterproductive when someone sends them a nasty message. I mean, obviously, it's immoral to start threatening people and harassing people and stuff like this, but this is a given. You know, I just naturally assume. And even if I take it as read, then the people doing it obviously don't. So making a moral argument to them, I mean, they know it's wrong to send nasty messages to people, but they obviously don't care. So there's no point in me making a moral argument to them. But there is a pragmatic argument as well, as in it just helps them ignore you if you send them nasty messages.
That's true.
And I don't want to be ignored. I want to have these conversations with these people. So I would really prefer it if you just didn't talk to them at all, because let's be honest, they're not going to listen. Or if you absolutely have to, be as polite as possible. But again, to the 15-year-old shit poster who goes on 4chan or whatever, they're not going to listen to that. They're not interested. They don't care. But there is a greater problem here that it's worth addressing. And so it was nice to be able to actually sit down with Lacey and have a conversation with her, even if we didn't agree with each other at the end of the conversation. Oh. You know, it was fine. Yeah. I'm happy to agree to disagree if she wants, and you know, on various issues. But the fact that it took so long to have those conversations is annoying, to be honest.
And speaking of conversations and men working too hard, you were recently on the Joe Rogan show. And
I was, yeah. I really enjoyed it.
And we've heard that was, it could be quite an experience. So can you tell us just, how even that came about, who contacted who, and really what your experience was like when you sat down with him?
Right, yeah. I mean, I was out in LA to do, to go to VidCon. Because basically I wanted to meet my peers, you know, the other YouTubers who criticize social justice. We all quite like each other online, and you know, thought we'd meet up, and everyone got along in the flesh as well, which was nice. And because Rogan's in Los Angeles as well, I think it was Dave Rubin who set me up with him. He got in contact with him or something for me. But yeah, just before I had to go catch a flight, basically, I sort of last minute booking onto his show. So I was exhausted and flustered. And I tell you what, the place where he was the hottest place I've ever been to in my life. I'm not
like
kidding.
The building or what?
No, not the building. The building was lovely and air conditioned. Everything is air conditioned out there. It's in this area of LA called the Valley, and I don't know what it is about the sort of geographical formation of it. But my God, like you're standing in the street in the shade and of a tree or a building, and the inside of my nostrils were burning from the heat of the air. It was the strangest thing in the world. I mean, like it felt like I was just completely wrapped in hot towels. And so, like, you know, I could feel the heat outside of my skin, and like a weight. It was a horrible place, and I can't imagine why anyone would live there. I just, God, I mean, like, for the difference in Britain, you know, it's like we live in an air conditioned country. You've got to make all your buildings like 21 degrees C. Yeah, well, that's basically our country. Sometimes a little bit colder, but God, I couldn't live like that. It was horrible.
So that was the experience. It was hot.
The show itself was really cool. I really enjoyed talking to Joe. It was really interesting, and I've been watching it for years, like most people, I guess. And yeah, it was weird to be sort of like in the seat, and I'm not gonna lie, I was tired and nervous.
Well, didn't he talk to you for like 3 hours?
Yeah,
it was a long interview. It was a long interview, right?
Yeah, it was. Yeah,
you moved your flight. I understand. Yeah, so
I had to basically catch one the next day because I couldn't get to the airport in time to get the one that was later that same day. But it was fine. It was worth it.
That's good. Edmund, our president of was out actually in Joe Rogan's studio with Ron Miscavige, who is kind of like speaking out against Scientology right now. So he got to check it out. So it's a nice place.
I should really look into all of that because I bet there are some interesting parallels between Google and Scientology right now. They call themselves Googlers, right?
Yeah.
They call people working at Google Googlers. That's really weird.
There's a future YouTube video for you in the making right now.
Yeah,
just from this conversation. Yeah. So to sum everything up, because we talked a lot about the alt-right and how that was probably perpetuated by a lot of these far leftists. We talk about how our society is going to shit because we have no one to vote for, and we have all of these insane oppressions that are going on. What is a regular person, a regular listener, a voter to do? I know that you're in Britain, so you've got a little bit of a different political climate, but you could say that it's somewhat parallels. So what do you do when you go out in the polls? How do you try to influence? I mean, you have 700,000 subscribers, so you definitely have a following. How do you try to motivate society to move in what you think is the right direction?
Well, I'm not. I'm quite forthright by telling people I'm not a journalist. I'm a liberal activist, and I'm like an actual liberal activist. I actually care about the foundational principles of the philosophy that our civilization is based on, and I'd like to see a continuation of those. That's my bias, and it's not perfect either. Like Enlightenment, the sort of Western liberal epistemology is not like solid or anything like that. There are real problems with it, but it's not like the collectivists don't have their own problems. And I think that materially you can just point out, well, look, a system run the way I want it run makes the world a better place. It makes everyone richer. It makes them live longer. It makes them better educated. It makes them, any metric, child mortality, and democracies don't even go to war with each other. What democracies go to war with each other? What liberal independent democracies? They don't. They become fast allies. There's a reason that Britain and America are the closest allies, and I think it comes down to the sort of philosophical tradition that we're both in. That we at least should hold dear. I really think, and it's the same with the other ones. Like Canada, Australia, New Zealand. These things are important. And I want to advocate for that. That's an important thing. I see so few people who are effectively doing that. And on either side, I mean, like the alt-right, the traditional conservatives are too close to theocrats, to my opinion. They're more than happy to inject God into stuff. Right. Obviously, not my deal.
Even into North Korea.
Yeah. The alt-rights are racial collectivists, as are the far left. The socialists are just full on, they're economic collectivists, which is another aspect that I'm totally against. I can accept social programs, but that's because we live in wealthy societies. If we go full socialist, we'll end up like Venezuela. So I'm against that. So basically, and it just seems to be the most successful political philosophy. I mean, where is better than the West? If they can point to a country that we actually want to emulate, they can let me know. Because it looks like everyone wants to emulate us, and at least come here and take advantage of us. And that's fine. We can export what we do there if they want. Yeah. It's like, look, we're all really interested in how successful the West is. Like, well, line up. We'll tell you what the secrets are. It's really not that difficult, in fact. We've got a bunch of books you can read, and then you'll have the same political philosophy we have. You could just carbon copy the United States Constitution if you like, or, make whatever change you need, obviously. But, it's not like we can't be confident and export this philosophy, but for some reason we've lost all confidence in our own philosophical traditions. And I'm sorry, but they're just clearly better than other people's.
Right.
You know, I am a bit of a Western chauvinist in that regard. I'm sorry, but if you look at the material results, I mean, what other countries have borne anti-racism, anti-sexism, anti-slavery movements? You know, what other cultures are breeding these? If not, like, you know, Western European liberal civilization.
Israel.
I mean, seriously, tell me, you know,
There you
where's
go.
the Chinese anti-racism campaigns?
Finland and Israel come to mind.
Sub-Saharan anti-sexism campaigns, you know, it's all from Western influence. These things are only born out of Western influence, and so the lack of confidence in our own civilization pisses me off.
All right. I mean, yeah, they're there. I mean, I think Islamism has done a good job of like wrecking the liberal values of the Middle East, which sucks because it used to be there. And we definitely have those liberal values, which include debate, honest, intellectual honesty. And that's why we're really happy that you're going to be coming to Milwaukee in September 30th to debate Thomas Smith of the, and if people don't know him,
debate in air quotes.
Yeah, debate. It's going to be a conversation, but I think it's a debate where hopefully you guys can find where you agree and where you disagree. And this is Thomas Smith from the Serious Inquiries Only podcast, who actually self-described.
I listened to a bunch of his podcasts. He seems like a really reasonable chap. So I'm hoping that I can have a productive dialogue with him, because I'd like to. And it's not that, like, I think for the most part it's that people don't really think about the root of why something's occurring, and so they see it in isolation and think, well, that's not so bad. But if you trace it back to its root, you can see why other things are happening as well, which they don't agree with, but they haven't gone all that way far back and then figured out why these other things, why this is the source of it. You know, there's a reason that why things happen from certain political ideologies. But I'm really looking forward to having a dialogue with him, because I think there's a lot we can inform each other on.
And I think sometimes too, meeting in person is even more fun than kind of doing response videos or online. It's going to be a good opportunity. We're going to have a great after party. So if you want to meet Carl Benjamin, Sargon of Akkad, the real one, not the fake Twitter one, do it. And it's going to be fun. I'm looking forward to meeting you.
On September 30th. And yeah, we kind of wanted to end with whatever message you want to send to folks who can't find you on Twitter anymore, what your final thoughts are on that whole situation, just so that, you know, they might look to this podcast to, you know, to get some answers.
I don't really have any final thoughts, but you can always my Facebook account is I better tell you actually, for check for myself, because I can never remember. It's just facebook.com/Sargon of Akkad 100, because Sargon of Akkad had been taken. And you can just search Sargon on Google, and my channel's one of the first things that comes up. You'll find me very easily there.
Well, it was a pleasure speaking with you, and we're really going to look forward to seeing you live on September 30th, and we hope everyone else out there is going to join us.
Thank you very much. I can't wait.
Awesome.
All
Take
right.
care.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you for listening to Myth Informed. Myth Informed is brought to you by Mythicist Milwaukee. Producer Sean Frasick, associate producers Fritz Blondon and Kristen Whitaker Hood, engineer Josh Benishek, technical consultant Jason Lawson, and hosts Brian, Dimitri, Jacob, and Joseph. Every week we produce a new podcast that sheds light on religion, secularism, and mythology. If you enjoy this show, please support us on Patreon at patreon.com/mythicist. Mythicist Milwaukee also brings major secular conferences and debates to the Milwaukee area, along with community events, both local and online. To support us in bringing future events, become a member at mythicistmilwaukee.com to receive member-only benefits. You can also visit mythicistmilwaukee.com and hit the donate button located at the bottom of each page to place a financial donation amount of your choice. And now, the closing theme, written and performed by Shelley Siegel.
Athena's wisdom and beauty, and Hades underneath. Isis of fertility, and ether of the Greeks. They all lie at rest, and who will be the next to die? Poseidon in the sea, Athena's wisdom and beauty, and Hades underneath, Isis of fertility, and ether of the Greeks. They all lie at rest, and who will be the next to die? You know they